Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Rhona O'Connell, head of market analysis with EMEA and Asia at Nasdaq-listed StoneX Financial, to review first quarter trends in the metals market and what that could signal. Rhona, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Jill.
And Rhona, let's start with the silver spike. What are you seeing there?
Silver is notoriously volatile. For years, it may appear to be doing very little, but then when it does take off, it can do it very dramatically. And when it comes down again, that can be even more dramatic. And a lot of people have made money, but an even larger number of people have lost it as a result. What happened at the end of January was that there was a group of retail investors who were of the view that silver was very heavily short. And I think possibly they may have missed the trick here, because the outstanding short positions on the exchanges are to a very large extent a function of the bullion banks financing their long physical positions. So they took that view, they went into the silver market with a view to try and squeeze out the shorts, and it took on its own momentum. So it rocketed something like 30% in 3 trading days. The volumes on the exchanges were obviously high, but also that's reflected in the volumes in the LBMA numbers, which were, just for that 4-day period, they were 2.5 times the average for the rest of the quarter. And in the options, they were 3.5 times as much.
And what trends are you watching in gold?
Gold is a function of all sorts of different elements. Certainly over the first quarter of this year, the key parameter has been the yield on the US 10-year Treasury, because that has been the primary parameter which has reflected people's expectations for inflation. And the correlation has actually been relatively high. So whenever the 10-year bond yield has done something, gold has gone in the opposite direction. That relationship has now started to break down a little bit, because I think what is happening now is that whereas for the last 6 weeks or so, a lot of market participants have seen potentially the 2% inflation target as a threat. In fact, it's not, because economies need a little bit of inflation in there to keep things moving and to keep things fluid. And it looks now as if that realization is starting to come through, and the price action towards the middle of April has certainly borne that out, with the price moving away from 1700 up towards 1750 as people absorb the persistently dovish views from the central banks.
And platinum averaged twice the volume of palladium. Why do you think that is, and is it significant?
I don't think it's significant particularly. I think it reflects 2 things. One is that palladium has a long-standing reputation for being comparatively illiquid by comparison with its peers in the metal suite. But more importantly, I think this time, is that platinum had been staggering through a 6-year-long bear market until turn of October, November last year. And then as investors started to look at it as being undervalued just in its own right, they were also starting to look through the pandemic and the problems in the auto sector. And that in turn leads on to the change in emphasis from governments when it comes to the economic recovery. That is going to work in favor of the electric vehicles as opposed to the gasoline and diesel fueled vehicles. So investors are starting to look at the very long term for that, because that bodes very well for platinum with respect to fuel cells. So it's partly fundamental and partly a value judgment.
And Rhona, to wrap up here, do high volumes signal a change in trend?
Generally speaking, they'll signal either a change in trend or certainly a correction. We've known that anecdotally for years, because you can just feel it in the way the market is moving. But looking at the LBMA numbers gives us confirmation of that. We can look at any of those 4 metals, and there are several points in any one year where volumes are spiking, and you can see a turn in trend, or as I say, at very least a correction, either at the time or very shortly thereafter, which makes sense, because if sentiment is changing, some people will be closing positions and others will be opening them.
All right, Rhona, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.